mics and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Athens City Council. Today is Monday, December 12th, 2016. We will be in a special session this evening, and I will be acting as President Pro Tem. President Nisley is away this evening. We begin this evening with Finance and Personnel Committee. It is roughly 7:05 p.m. Councilmember Jeff Reisner will be chairing the Finance and Personnel Committee. Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem Butler. I just have one item. It's City Council compensation. As you know, we've had several ordinances brought forward in the midst of passing them concerning compensation for our non-union employees. I brought up the topic of City Council. Back in 2014, we passed an ordinance. It was 12414. That's on our shared drive if anyone wants to take a look at it. And in that ordinance, we said commencing January 1, 2015, the salary of each member of council shall be $7,612.02 per annum for calendar year 2015. And this ordinance fixed the amounts for 4 years after that into calendar year 2019. As you know, by state law, we cannot pass pay raise for council when we are actually in that session. So it has to be done for a future council, and for those who will propose that future council. What I was just wanting to get a sense from the Finance and Personnel Committee and other council is that should we at this point look into this and make provisions for increases after the year 2019, beginning now, or should we wait another year, or even 2 years for that matter, before we get on this? I just want to bring this up so that it's not lost. Sometimes we get involved with other things, and there's much more important things here than dealing with pay raise for council. And it gets lost, and so it's good to have this on the record that we are, or have at least touched on the subject and looked at it, and are trying to come to a decision about it. So I'd be happy to listen to anyone's suggestions, ideas, and so on about this matter. So I opened up to the committee members and on council, then afterwards administration, elected officials. Councilmember Butler.
Thank you. I'll briefly comment and again welcome input from our auditor and deputy auditor. I know during if I recall correctly, during the financial crisis era, 2008, 2009, I believe council was very cognizant of the challenges that the city was facing financially, and made efforts at the time to put a freeze or to not compensate council in the future, near future. I think if my memory serves me correctly, does that sound accurate from the auditor's office?
Yes.
Thank you, Auditor Heck.
I was just going to do the calculations, but
Thank you.
we did have a big discussion a couple years ago, as you know. This goes out a couple years. So I don't know if you guys gave yourself 1% or 2%. I was just about to try to do it, but we've been pretty steady at 2% for everyone else. I don't know why.
I believe you're correct on 2%.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's what we're giving everybody else, so I don't know, but I certainly wouldn't do any less for council. I think maybe that first year, you didn't take raises. So then if you did 2% on top of that, it's really up to you. My only thing is I wouldn't go past 2019. I think you have time to go in and do that, don't you? Like next year, just in case there's any change in the financial picture. You know, hopefully it'll be really nice and you could get a little more than that.
Correct.
So if it is 2%, but I guess you could look at whether, you know, it was 2% on a nothing or 1%.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe consider increasing them a little bit. These salaries, you know, are certainly not a large portion of our general fund budget. And there would be no financial hardship if you decided to do something with your salaries for the next couple of years. Unless you went crazy, but I'm assuming normal
No.
raises.
That's not going to happen.
And perhaps if Councilmember Reisner has the documentation with him, he can acknowledge what we are currently earning or...
Well, I'll just read what we have here. The ordinance goes on to say that, and this is ordinance 12414, the amount would be $7,764.26 per annum for calendar year 2016, that's what we're in. $7,919.55 per annum for calendar year 2017. $8,077.94 per annum for calendar year 2018, and $8,239.50 per annum for calendar year 2019, and hereafter. So essentially, this ordinance of 12414 stopped at 2019 for any raises. It just freezes after that, and then payable biweekly. And again, this ordinance is on all your, on the computer drives.
Right.
Councilmember Fall.
I think it has to also be said that we do not get any, like, medical benefit. We don't have health insurance through the city. So this is almost more like a stipend. Though there is some retirement that is provided, some funding into au pairs.
That's correct.
And so, but, so.
Councilmember Pepe?
My comment would be is everybody's term of council ends the 7th of the next year,
That's correct.
December, and this runs through 19. So discussing it at this point seems little far in advance.
Premature?
Premature.
Okay,
That's what I'm feeling at this point.
okay.
But it's good to get it on the record in the
Councilmember,
minutes.
Auditor?
Once you file for reelection, if you're gonna run again next year in February, you can't make any changes. So just keep that in mind. It does run longer than necessary, but for the 2 years after that, after next year, you would have to do it before, before you file. You can't do it once you're in office.
Got it.
And I would agree with Auditor Heck that right now what we're talking about is the 2018, 2019 term that you all will be serving. And the best practice really would be to, if you're going to do a raise or an increase, to do that before the filing deadline so that anyone who wishes to run for council would know what the salary would be.
That makes sense too.
So you're suggesting that the
We do.
filing for 2019 before?
I don't know the exact date, I think it's 90 days before the primary election, so that would be the timeframe.
From what I understand, it's 5 days before the filing deadline, to be able to make a change like this for council to enact something. So, and I would imagine that it is also before anyone does file, which makes sense too. But, it would seem to me that the most prudent thing to do would be to revisit this in 2018, or near the end of the year, 2018, because filings would have to begin early, February of 2019. for the general election, primary and the general election to take office again in 2020. So to explore it now is, it really seems forecasting a long time into the future for what could be a completely different council. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Be all billionaires.
Councilmember McGee?
Excuse me, but am I right in thinking that if we're talking about a 1% or a 2% raise, we're talking about $74, basically? Is that what we're talking about? I
That's
just
about
want the
right.
public to be aware, I mean, I'm not going to retire to Middle East on this kind of money. So, again, I think it's premature, but I do want to emphasize we're talking about a very small amount of money.
Okay. Any other comments? I think I'm getting the sense here that the thing to do is, okay, we've acknowledged it, it's on the record, and look at this in 2018.
I think Auditor, was there one other comment you wanted to add? Thank you, Auditor.
It's not up to me, of course, but in the past, as you know, I was on council, several years ago. Council passed their ordinance for their salaries every 2 years because that's your term. When they did this one, they went out 4 years because that was for the rest of us. And it's just, like you said, it's not a lot. We've had this discussion before when we talk about employee compensation. A 2% raise on someone who's not making very much is pretty minimal in the big picture compared to someone who's at the top of the payment structure and they get a 2% raise. And so, pretty small raises. I would think right now, if you're looking at this, you'd be thinking about changing what's in here and increasing your salary a little bit. As Councilmember McGee said, it's a pretty small amount for the entire year we're talking. And so, and the other part of that is you probably have time if you want to start in January, but it's a good thing to have this discussion now. Or,
Comments on
start Wednesday.
the auditor's suggestion or comments?
I think one thing to remember is that it's not necessarily going to be us who's running or on council when it comes into effect. And I would wonder if having a bit more compensation would help broaden the number of prospective candidates. I'm not sure. But it is minimal, but I mean, it does kind of pay for all the paper that we're not supposed to use, sort of thing. So.
I want to follow up, if I may, on what the auditor was mentioning. As you remember, there were several years where council and other elected positions had no raise, several years. So, in one way of thinking this too, it's kind of behind the power curve in terms of where salaries should be, but that's the past. So maybe now is the time to look at what the percentage increase is for 17 and 18, as long as it gets through before 5 days prior to the filing deadline.
Any comments, suggestions on that?
It's your call.
I call.
Councilmember,
Thank you.
Councilmember Reisner.
So,
Yes.
no, I
Councilmember
don't think we
Reisner,
really like
I'll
talking
just
about
throw
this.
in that I agree with Councilmember Fall in that it might help to attract some folks who otherwise might not run. I think when I decided to run for council, I didn't even know it was a paid position at all, so it was a pleasant surprise. But there are folks for whom it might make a difference, the difference between running or not running, or just sweeten the pot a little bit. So
I
I
see.
think that's
Well,
certainly
it would
worth
seem that if we
considering.
are thinking along those lines, it might be prudent then to look out at other communities, other councils, see what the compensations are as we do with other things, other groups within the city, before we come up with any figures like actual amounts or percentages or anything else, or we just come to the conclusion, no, we'll just leave it alone. But essentially have some facts before us to to actually be able to argue intelligently about.
Yeah, I would concur. I think it's worthwhile to pursue with some more investigation and data collection.
Okay. Councilmember Pepe?
When we did the employees throughout the system here, did they not look at council? I have a memory, so council was not a part of that, okay. When they compared us to other cities and they looked at the comparison.
No, they did.
I-
Council was
I
in there.
thought they
That was
were
when
in
I
there.
first learned that there was full-time council members out there in the state of Ohio. But no, that information is there. I can easily get that to you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we already have some information
Sure.
that we don't really need to make a phone
Sure.
call. It sounds like we already have it in that report.
I have it in a document for every municipality in the state of Ohio.
Okay.
And it lists
Okay.
everything from police chief to council and president of council as well. So
Okay.
I can dig that up.
Maybe if that could be shared
Sure.
with us. I
Yeah.
mean, that's one way to already
That's fine.
exist.
Great. That makes things easier.
Thank you.
Well, if there's nothing else, I'll conclude. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Reisner. We now move into the rest of the council meeting. We established a quorum. We have all members of council present. Again, as I acknowledged, I will be acting as President Pro Tem, but I also have a vote. Ordinances for third reading. Ordinance 137-16. An ordinance authorizing right-of-way acquisition, construction, and construction engineering of the McKinley Avenue Extension Project. And this is number 302, introduced by Councilmember Pappy.
Thank you. I move to adopt 13716.
Second.
As a reminder to council, this is for our McKinley Avenue road improvement as well as the roundabout on Stimson Avenue where it will connect. The total cost of the project, this ordinance would expend, okay, let me get this right. The total cost is $2,205,650,000. And as you recall, these monies are coming from many different pots of money. And I think I have that right. Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Pappy. We have a motion and a second for ordinance 137-16. Are there any comments from council or the public? Councilmember McGee.
I've stated several times my concern about this particular project with the entrance of, I'm not sure which road it is, not Lurk Road, from the hut.
Rock Riffle. Rock Riffle.
Rock Riffle Road, yes. I find it incredible that people are suggesting that we will move forward and approve this with a mere suggestion that somehow, because it's outside of the city property, and I do understand that, but that somehow this will be taken care of by the state, that this problem will be solved. When I see so many people just racing across the bridge and making that intersection there so incredibly dangerous. So I would just emphasize, I am not satisfied with any kind of assurance that somehow this will be taken care of. And I think that the problem should be taken care of now. If the state's going to do something about it, the problem exists there. And putting a roundabout will only, in my view, facilitate the problem itself and increase the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Katsas.
Thank you, President Pro Tem. It was interesting because on Friday when I was at the ribbon cutting for the new bikeway spur, there were some senior officials there from ODOT, and now I can't speak for ODOT, but some of the conversations that I had was that interchange is very, very, very high on their radar. So, you know, we have to move at the speed that the rest of the other state governments move at, but they recognize that that interchange has many problems.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Member Costas, I appreciate that. As long as I've been on council, that interchange has been discussed. I think it's been high on their list, and obviously funding, we're working on the East State Street and 33 interchange, but I have heard on many occasions that the next concern is that interchange there and how to redesign that.
Thank you. And I would acknowledge as well the concerns that Councilmember McGee has stated, that many Athenians don't necessarily recognize that as being in the city limits or outside the city limits. It's still in our mindset as being Athens. Having said that, as far as I can remember, many conversations back with Andy Stone, our Public Works Director, this is on the radar, as was alluded to by Member Katsas and Councilmember Pappy. So it is something that I am aware that will be addressed in the near future. How near, I'm not exactly positive, but I know that.
I would also add that usually a roundabout, I think, is a traffic calming device, and as it stands right now, there is no light, there is no stop sign, there is no nothing to calm the traffic or slow it down.
Correct.
So the entrance to that roundabout will be very close after you cross the bridge over the river. So I would suggest that probably the roundabout is more of a traffic calming for that Stimson Avenue corridor. I know many people to speed there and then hit the business section, but are still, there's no light, there's nothing to stop them other than traffic. There's no traffic signal until you get a couple blocks down the street.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Thank
would
you.
be my comment.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Katsas.
Thank you. And not to task administration with anything extra, but is this a possibility? Yeah, why not?
We're not doing anything else.
Can we, is there a chance that we might be able to collect some data before and after? Maybe track some speeds of what the vehicles are doing right now.
Sure.
And seeing what happens afterwards, and then we might actually have some data that we can prove that these projects, are successful on what we're trying to accomplish.
We certainly could.
Excellent
And one of the
idea.
things, too, with this roundabout is part of the line of sight problem that you see as you get near Sonic, or someone exiting from there, that'll be corrected with this as well, or at least with the roundabout, some of that's gonna be alleviated, which is also another metric that we can be looking at is, focalize, accident or incident reporting that takes place in that area with the roundabout. But we can do that. I'll share as well, I've spoken with Fred Vogel from District 10 about the interchange, and to Member McGee's point, and to also corroborate what Member Katsas was saying, is that whole interchange is on District 10's radar, ODOT's radar, because it's more extensive than just and I'm not making excuses here, it's more extensive than just the Rock Riffle connector. It's the interchange as someone continues east on 50. It's the whole thing was back in the 60s ill-designed. And ODOT's aware of that, and they're looking at it, and again, not a lot of the interchange. Some things will be alleviated with the 33 East State Street interchange, but again, not for what the area you're talking about. That area in particular, it's not just where Stimson Avenue becomes the on-ramp onto 33. It's other spokes on that whole interchange that are trying at best when it comes to traffic flow through that area. So they are. It's not falling on deaf ears.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember McGee.
And thank you, and I just wanted to respond. I've heard a lot of, it's on the radar, it's not falling on deaf ears kind of situations for a long period of time, and I believe it is falling on deaf ears unless something is done. So in my view, it's dare I use the old expression, putting the horse before, or the cart before the horse. So that's my opposition to it, the fact that we're saying that we'll do something. The other thing I really want to emphasize, and I'm concerned about the safety of OU students there. As you well know, there's hundreds of OU students who take that walk across
Yeah.
the bridge and over to Bong Hill on a daily basis when the weather is nice. There's no sidewalk for them. There's no safe protection for them to walk that area. It is quite probably a miracle that somebody has not been struck by cars yet. And it's something that the state and the city should be aware of. The city, even though, again, it's not our property and we can't do anything about it, and I realize that in one sense we can't do anything about it, but on the other hand, we certainly should be putting more pressure on the state to do something to protect our citizens rather than saying, let's do our best to make sure that we have increased flow of traffic in this area. So that's my objection to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katsas.
Yeah, I'm sorry to drag this out just a little bit more, but proposing to leave it just the way it is doesn't make much sense to me when you're coming to design traffic and trying to work through a problem. We do have multiple problems at the end of Stimson Avenue, but I don't think doing nothing is going to really, and waiting for somebody else to do something is really going to accomplish much.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you.
I, too, briefly will express my support for the ordinance by acknowledging that there's been a lot of work with the university in preparing and planning. So I'll leave it at that. Any other comments or questions from council or the public? Mayor's office?
I do, because I guess I
Thank you.
can't
Yeah.
just leave it laying out there,
Thank you, Mayor.
and Councilmember McGee knows that. Member McGee, we will continue to put pressure on ODOT to come with a fix for that. And that's the best I can tell you, because it isn't the city's property. But I can sit there and continue to engage ODOT with exploring something for that whole interchange. When that will happen, I can tell you when my engagement would happen, but, in terms of ODOT correcting it,
Thank you, Mayor. We do have a motion and a second. If there's no further comments. All those in favor of adopting ordinance 137-16, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Nay.
Thank you. We have one opposition. The ordinance passes. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to ordinance 138-16. An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an LPA federal local let agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation, ODOT, for the McKinley Avenue Extension Project, and this is project number 302, and declaring an emergency. This is introduced by Councilmember Pappy.
Thank you. I move to adopt 13816.
Second.
This is the final piece for the legislation we just passed regarding our agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation to move forward with the project.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any comments regarding ordinance 138-16? Okay, we do have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adopting ordinance 138-16, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Nay.
Again, thank you. Please note we have one opposition and the ordinance passes. Ordinance 139-16, an ordinance amending ordinance 34-16, Richland Avenue between the Bridges Lighting Project, and this is number 291, introduced again by Councilmember Pappy.
Thank you. I move to adopt 13916.
Second.
I just want to make note that this is the final closeout for the Between the Bridges project there on Richland Avenue. We do need to appropriate, we moved from 560 to 585,000. the total cost will be $620,000, right? Yeah. So our original totals, as with many projects, sometimes there's a little bit of an overage, but that's where we're at.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Are there any questions or comments regarding ordinance 13916 from council or the public? I'll briefly acknowledge it. Again, I think this is a project that's been successful. We've worked and collaborated in a positive way, again, with Ohio University, and I, along with many others, I'm sure can attest that it looks nice and was well done. We have a motion and a second for ordinance 13916. All those in favor of adopting the ordinance, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The ordinance has been adopted. Ordinance 142-16, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract extension to provide financial support for the operation of the Athens County Economic Development Council. This is introduced by Councilmember Fall.
Thank you. I move that we adopt 14216.
Second.
We've talked about this. We also had a presentation from the Economic Development Council. It's backdated to the beginning of this year, and it will extend for 1 calendar year after that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any questions or comments regarding this ordinance? Yes, Councilmember McGee.
I was just curious for the public, if they are watching, whether we could state how much the financial support is. Can that be stated at this time?
Sure. It's $50,000, I believe, is what? 55. 55. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's, as you know, funded by the county, university, and the city. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, council or the public? Sure, our auditor, thank you.
Just quickly, so you know that money comes out of,
Tourism.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, I thought somebody said something. Sorry, that money comes out of our
Hotel.
tourism money
Yeah, hotel motel.
that we get.
Transient guest tax.
Right, transient guest tax for people who stay at our local motels and places like that. So that's where it comes from.
Thank you.
Thank you, auditor. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we do have a motion and a second for ordinance 14216. All those in favor of adopting ordinance 14216, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The ordinance has been adopted. Ordinance 143-16, an ordinance authorizing the sale of property no longer needed for a municipal purpose and declaring an emergency. This too is introduced by Councilmember Fall.
Thank you. I propose that we adopt 14316.
Second.
And it's just as it states, putting to sale a property no longer needed. This is property out a ways that we use as a municipal sewage waste storage facility, otherwise known as a field. So,
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there any other questions or comments regarding this from council? The mayor's office, any questions or comments? None?
It's treated sludge from the wastewater. I just had to say it. So,
Sure.
on a
Do you
field.
want to say it louder? I don't know if everyone heard you. Thank you. That was our
Mine's more technical.
Service Safety
sounding.
Director helping educate us. Any questions or comments from the public? Moving forward, we have a motion and a second for ordinance 14316. All those in favor of adopting the ordinance, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Thank you, everyone. The ordinance has been adopted. And our last ordinance for third reading, ordinance 14516, an ordinance amending Athens City Code, Title 17, Municipal Income Tax, Chapter 17.01.051, Collection at Source, Withholding from Qualifying Wages, and Chapter 17.01.08, Credit for Tax Paid, and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. I move that we adopt 14516.
Second.
We've discussed this several readings and in committee. Let me just refresh your memory. I'll read the most pertinent point of the ordinance here, the credit for taxes paid. Every individual taxpayer who resides in the city, that's the city of Athens, who receives net profits, salaries, qualifying wages, commissions, rents, or other personal service compensation for work done or services performed or rendered outside the city, if it is established with supporting documentation that said income is subject to municipal income tax in another municipality, and that said tax has been paid to that other municipality on the same income taxable under this chapter, shall be allowed a credit against the tax imposed by this chapter of the amount so paid by him or in his behalf to such other municipality. For tax year 2016, or current year, the credit shall not exceed 1%. Effective January 1, 2017, the credit shall not exceed 1.25%. That's essentially it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council? And/or do we want any comments from auditor? Any questions on this, everyone? Auditor, anything you want to add?
The other part of this ordinance is just cleaning up the language based on some of the changes coming down from the state regarding due dates for when it's due. That's the first part. And then Member Reisner already explained, like he said, probably the most important part to people that live here and work somewhere else and get taxed, that we've increased their credit.
Thank you, Auditor Heck. Any other questions or comments? We have a motion and a second for ordinance 145-16. All those in favor of adopting the ordinance, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The ordinance has been adopted. Moving on to ordinances for second reading, ordinance 149-16, an ordinance declaring certain vehicles no longer needed for municipal purpose, and this is introduced by Councilmember Pappy. Any comments? Ordinance 150-16, an ordinance to make appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures of the City of Athens, Ohio during the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2017, and this is introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee. Any comments? Ordinance 151-16, an ordinance authorizing 2017 staffing levels and non-union compensation, repealing all ordinances inconsistent therewith, and declaring an emergency. Again, introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee. Any questions or comments? Ordinance 152-16, an ordinance adopting a fringe benefits package for non-union personnel with the City of Athens, and repealing all ordinances inconsistent therewith, and declaring an emergency. Again, introduced by the Finance and Personnel Committee. Any questions or comments on that? Ordinance 153-16, an ordinance amending Athens City Code, Title 7, Traffic Code, Chapter 7.02, Equipment, Loads, to add sections for operation of low-speed, underspeed utility vehicles or a mini truck upon any street or highway within the City of Athens, and declaring an emergency, introduced by Councilmember Pappy. Any questions or comments regarding this? Yes, Councilmember McGee.
I was under the impression that we had raised some issues last week when we discussed this concerning the criteria that the chief of police would use in determining whether to authorize the operation, and that I don't believe it's gone any further than the question of, you know, what criteria would he use, if any criteria. There was a question, I know we spent a lot of time spinning our wheels with the question of who would be a designee, and for some reason the representative of the university was dealing with university issues, which I don't think was a real issue, but my concern is always if citizens are being told that they can or cannot do something, I believe there should be something in the ordinance which would specify under what conditions they can do something. So I don't believe it's been changed, so I did want to voice my concern about that.
Thank you, Councilmember McGee. Any other questions or comments?
Councilmember McGee, it has not been changed. There was some discussion with administration as well and the law director regarding his designation being the chief of police, that they felt that it sufficed. We are following up on the ORC 4511.214 and looking at what works in our community. And this was initially brought up in conversation because of the safety issues and what we saw in our community here in Athens, and that's why this ordinance was brought forward. I'm not moving to make an amendment, so that's where we stand, at least from my point of view.
Thank you, Councilmember. And third reading will be Wednesday, so there is time and opportunity for more questions or information gathering. Any other comments?
We support the ordinance as it stands, as it reads,
Thank you.
as well.
The City Service Safety Director has acknowledged that they support the ordinance as it stands. Thank you. Moving on, we are at resolution for third reading. Resolution 12-16, a resolution declaring single-use carryout bags an environmental concern. And this is introduced by Councilmember Cochran.
Thank you, President Pro Tem. This resolution has been talked about a lot previously, and in its previous iteration as an ordinance, which it is no longer an ordinance, so we want to be clear on that respect. It is a resolution with similar whereases to help educate about why we believe single-use carryout bags to be an environmental concern. This is in keeping with the city's position as a signatory to the zero waste plan put forth by Rural Action's Zero Waste Project. And this resolution has the support of the Athens Sustainability and Environment Commission, which is in its final stages of formulating a sustainability plan for the city of Athens. This resolution has had a great deal of input from various community members, as well as the Sustainability Commission, the Athens Chamber of Commerce, and other concerned citizens who participated in a series of community conversations. So I'm not going to read the entire resolution, but the resolution does encourage consumers to use reusable bags whenever possible, encourages retailers to promote the usage of reusable bags as well, and to capture more bags into the recycling stream as much as possible. It also obligates the city, with the support of the Sustainability Commission and other organizations, to gather information and data about our numbers of bags recycled and reused within the city, in the hopes that we can establish some sort of benchmark about our current usage patterns. So that's the resolution in a nutshell, and I move to pass resolution R1216.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Questions and comments regarding the resolution? Councilmember Fall.
I want to commend Member Cochran. She took a lot of heat for something that, quite surprisingly, really didn't warrant a huge amount of heat. We pride ourselves on, being a progressive, enlightened city, and quite frankly, I thought that because of certain people having issues. And it being in the summer, and, you know, we were told basically by some of the media people, oh, we can really make a big deal about this. And that's unfortunate because there are cities all over the United States that have passed things. All the businesses that are in this town, that are major chains, have places that are in states and cities that have passed ordinances to reduce bags. It was not rocket science. So I think that people need to listen when things are introduced and come together, and I commend Member Cochran on not just giving up after some of the heat that you got. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fall. Councilmember Reisner.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Butler. Yes, I agree with this resolution. I support it, and I think Councilmember Cochran's done a great job putting this together, and I agree with Councilmember Fall that a lot of the hysteria that was generated out of this was totally unnecessary. In hindsight, it looks rather silly, but there we are. We're going to pass it tonight. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Councilmember Katsas.
Thank you, Pro Tem Butler. You know, I want to echo the same sentiments, but I also would like to, you know, kind of speak from a business standpoint. And I truly believe that, you know, business people have to be multifaceted. There's a lot of things that you have to cover when you're running a small business, and I believe those people are very talented. They're very smart. I should know. But you know, the big thing, you know, the thing I want to say is something like this would not have been a deal killer for business in Athens. There are so many other things that business people have to tackle that are just so much bigger and affect the business financially and in so many other ways that I was kind of disappointed to see a few people come out and speak that way, because the majority of my conversations with other business owners were good. You know, it was just a lot of education, and who's to say that we're not back here, you know, in a couple of years? Because if New York and Washington, San Francisco, if they can do it, it's probably just a sign of things to come. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'd
you.
like to point
Yes,
out San
Councilmember.
Francisco is going to become a zero waste city by 2017. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Or Mayor Patterson, thank you.
I give Member Cochran a lot of praise for just the tenacity of sticking with this and moving forward. I also give you a lot of praise for finding a common spot, finding common ground for a lot of the changes that have occurred in this piece of legislation, or what was the legislation and is now a resolution. I can speak for my office that Member Cochran had several meetings with me in terms of the changes that took place, and I appreciate you engaging with me to hear what my thoughts were on some of this as it was crafted. So I think, you know, this exemplifies, as rough and as rucky as it was, and it was, I watched it too, and I heard from an awful lot of people on both sides on this particular issue. But again, I can't speak highly enough in terms of your ability to find the common ground for everyone that was engaged and come to a place where I'm receiving emails from individuals who are basically saying, this works to the point where, you know, for this resolution, the way it's worded, to where I will, you know, it encourages me to find alternatives to plastic bags, and that's coming from a business leader in the city of Athens. So that means a lot, and I hope you take that to heart for the work that you've done.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll also acknowledge briefly, too, that the Kroger in Circleville, upon a recent visit, my wife and I took our own cloth bags in for purchase, and we were the recipients of 10-cent surplus as a result of using our own bags. So there are models out there where entrepreneurs and business owners and businesses are being proactive and encouraging their patrons to use alternatives to plastic. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adopting Resolution 1216, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The resolution passes. Congratulations, Member Khan. Okay, we have a few more things to acknowledge here. Before we move into executive session, I would like to acknowledge that we have rescheduled our regular session of City Council, which would typically be Monday next week, December 19th. It will now be held this Wednesday at noon, December 14th. And I'm not sure, will we be meeting here in council chambers or will we be meeting in council office?
Is it noon?
Noon.
I think here.
I'm sure we'll be okay meeting here and we can have it televised as well. So
In the closet.
look to meet here. So that's noon this week. December 14th will be the last meeting of council for this year. Okie dokie. Before we move into executive session, yes, sorry, I'm being reminded by our clerk that we do need a quorum. I can't make it, so we need at least 6 of you, other than me, to be here. I'll be at work that day. Worst case scenario, we'll reschedule, but we're expecting 6 of you to be here. Or else.
Do you need to know? Do you need to know? She needs to know.
I just want to be sure that you all can come.
Yes.
I'll be here.
Okay. Council members?
No, I'm not going to say.
You could be here. All right. So we have acknowledgement that 6 of you can be here. All right. We have an executive session on our
Keep it
agenda
wandering.
this evening, which is strictly limited to discussion regarding collective bargaining. Before we enter into executive session, we do need a motion to enter into executive session and a second.
I move to move into executive session with all members of council present, the mayor, the service safety director, the auditor, deputy auditor,
And consultant, Mr.
our
Esposito.
consultant, Mr. Esposito, and our law director. Did I get everyone?
I believe so. Thank you. Okay, we do have a motion and a second to enter into executive session. I do need a roll call of your support, beginning with Councilmember Reisner.
Aye.
Councilmember Pappy?
Aye.
Councilmember Fall?
Aye.
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 Councilmember?
Aye.
Councilmember? Wonderful. Okay, we will begin in roughly 5 minutes. We'll give media or others time to leave the room and vacate. We will reopen the doors after we conclude our executive session and then conclude with a formal adjournment at that time. So thank you. We will begin executive session in 5 minutes. Thank you.